Hey, everybody, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I am your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Kate Eberle Walker. Kate is the CEO of PresenceLearning, the leading provider of online special education services for K through 12 schools. In this role, she leads a majority female employee population whose mission is to not only provide students with learning needs, but to provide a flexible career path for nearly 1,000 special education clinicians, many of whom are working mothers. Kate became the CEO of the Princeton Review at age 39. Prior to that, she navigated the male-dominated investment world at Goldman Sachs, working her way up through management roles. She shares tell it like it is advice with her fellow managers in her book, The Good Boss: 9 Ways Every Manager Can Support Women at Work. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start by asking, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming CEO of Presence Learning?
Yes, absolutely. So I have to say, I when I started my career, I never contemplated that I would become a CEO of anything. I loved finance, I loved math, I loved numbers. As you said, I went into investment banking. I started my career at Goldman Sachs, and I spent about 5 years there. Went to business school and then came into the education industry right out of business school and ended up working for 9 years at Kaplan, a large educational company, and I led their M&A. So I did all their acquisitions, venture investment, all of that, and really got to know everything about the business of education, and got to study ultimately hundreds and hundreds of education companies through that job. It was a really cool job, and it wasn't until my later years there that I realized that I just had formed like really, really strong opinions of my own about what made for a good company and how a company should be run. And, when you do mergers and acquisitions, you're always putting together these plans and working with management teams. And, something just evolved for me along the way where I started to realize, well, I want to do that too. So I left Kaplan. I joined IAC, which is Barry Diller's company. They had recently bought tutor.com, their first education business, and they were building up a team to grow that and invest in more education companies. And that was kind of this very pivotal career moment for me because, as I said, I was starting to change kind of my own aspirations and what I wanted. And then the magic was I went to work for a female CEO for the first time. And Mandy Ginsburg, our CEO at tutor.com, was, really, really a mentor to me and a role model. And just kind of, it was at that point watching her, learning from her, that I thought, oh, this is something that I want to do, that I can do. And, I was lucky enough to have that mentor who saw me as her successor and developed me. So it was through that we bought the Princeton Review. I became the CEO, and that kind of put me on my path to the C-suite.
Congratulations on that as well. Up to that point, prior to seeing your mentor, it sounds like, in a way, like, was there any reluctance? Like, did you ever see yourself as the head of the organization?
It was really funny. I really never thought about it. I just thought that I guess I thought I was pretty good at M&A, and I was, a good negotiator, and I knew my numbers, and I thought, this is my skill. This is what companies would want to hire me to do. And there was this really critical conversation that I had a couple of years before I ended up leaving Kaplan. It was with one of the business unit CEOs there, and he offered me the opportunity to come work for him in his division and run a piece of the business, to come run a P&L. And I was really like knee-jerk reaction dismissive. I was like, no, that's not what I do. That's not what Kaplan pays me to do. I'm not even sure I really fully considered it. I didn't know it was a significant conversation at the time. I realized it because it kind of got in my head that he saw me that way. And he even said, he's like, well, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Because I see you being a really good CEO. And I was like, no, I'm not, that's not me. That's not who I am. I mean, maybe a COO, maybe, like number two to somebody, really helping them execute on their plan. But it was just this, I don't know, this block that I didn't yet see myself that way. And I've thought a ton about it. And, he was exactly right. I mean, he saw what I would become, what I could become. Why didn't I believe him? Why did it take a few more years? I think it did have to do with something that a lot of women struggle with. I was watching all of these men, all of the CEOs that I had worked with up until then were men. And I guess I didn't relate enough. I didn't connect enough to see that, I could do that too. I could be, maybe a different kind of a CEO. So I needed, I guess, a little more literal of a role model for myself before I kind of came around to it. And now, I've stayed close with him, and he gives me a hard time that he, it was definitely an "I told you so" moment for him a few years later when I did become a CEO.
Well, that's so great that he saw something in you that you were just beginning to see in yourself. And I imagine
Mm-hmm.
now you can. I imagine that's one of the pieces of a good boss, is seeing in others what they don't see in themselves. What was it that really inspired you to write the book, The Good Boss?
When I started writing this book, I actually thought it was going to be something a little different. It came out of these mentoring conversations that I was having with younger women. So once I became a CEO, I'd get asked for advice. How did you do it? What are your recommendations? And I started writing about that. I thought, well, there aren't enough female leaders out there, right? Like 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. So I thought, there's never going to be enough women leaders, or it's going to be a long time before there's enough that every young woman could actually have a real live mentor who's a female. So I'm going to write this book that's going to, amplify it. And I'm going to write down all the advice that I have so that, any young woman who wants to can read it. And I started writing it. And, I really recognized something that I did not like about my advice, which was a lot of it was about how to adapt yourself, how to maneuver in the world of business, in the world of men in some cases, how to sort of make yourself acceptable and accepted in the companies that you were navigating. And I didn't want it to be that. And so I shifted, and it was recognizing that flaw. And I think also, as I became more and more comfortable, confident in my own CEO roles, recognizing like the real power that you have when you're leading a company, I just started to feel like, I don't want to write this book for women telling them what to do and how to adapt themselves. I want to write it for managers and bosses and tell them what they need to do and how they need to take responsibility, because they're the ones with the power to actually change the environment. So it came out of that, about, wanting to, shift the burden from women to the people who are responsible for them in their careers.
Is that still a challenge, maybe not only for yourself, but for people in general, is how much do I adapt myself to the environment, which is in a way accepting the norms and culture as it is, versus being authentic and also trying to shift the culture by being who we are called to be as well?
It always is. It's still a challenge for me. It's still something where, I think I'm much more aware as I keep on moving forward in my career of those moments where, I think of how I'm being perceived, and, I catch myself sort of, being extra careful about what I say or how I say it. And, it's something that I actually noticed when I was writing this book. So there's a lot of other CEOs and leaders who are featured in the book who I interview about their strategies, their experiences. And so, when you're in the final stages of writing the book, you go back around and you ask everyone to, you show them what you wrote of their words, and you ask them to sign a release for the book, right? So when I did that, I noticed this interesting unintentional A/B test that I ran, where all to 100%, all of the male CEOs and leaders just very quickly, replied back like, "Yep, looks great. Here you go. Here's my signature. Great. Let me know when the book comes out." And every female leader to 100% had at least one, if not multiple rounds of edits of, "Can you change this word? Could I say this instead of that?" We're much more careful and thoughtful about not just the substance of what they said, but how exactly they said it. And I thought it was really representative to me of this ongoing challenge that a lot of women face, that, they have to be careful about, how their words are perceived and received, not just about the substance of what they say.
That's incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's something that I imagine people don't know and notice is that wall, that analysis, like, is this the right thing? How will this impact how I'm
Mm-hmm.
perceived and it's happening? And it sounds like based on that, micro, and it's probably a macro as well, that men don't necessarily have that self-regulation or self-awareness. Not that they don't, but I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-regulation. I mean, I like that word for it. I think that's what it is, or self-discipline. And I think it's that, men don't have to the same degree as women. It's
Sure.
not, I've certainly been accused in my lifetime of maybe overanalyzing things. But it's not just that. It's not, it's not just me, I'm overthinking or I'm being too careful. It's for a reason. It's because, you see as a woman what a difference it can make in your success, whether it's, negotiating a salary or something like that. You see that it matters a lot what you
Hmm.
say, how you ask. So I think you internalize it and you become more and more careful.
It's amazing how those little details reveal much more about the whole pattern at large. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about generalities. So we're not saying all people, all men, all women, of
Yes.
course, but we're looking at tendencies overall, which gives us insight on where we're at. What are some other realities that men or women may not be aware of that women go through in the workplace that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot written, which I think is good that people are becoming more aware of it, about the dynamics of speaking in meetings and being heard, being given, who gets credit for ideas. I learned a new term at some point along the way of researching this, which is he-peating, when a woman has said something in a meeting and then a man repeats it, a little more loudly, or in a way that it suddenly is his idea, not her idea. There's a lot of that dynamic happens in meetings. I write a bit about it in a book I really like. An example from David Siegel, the CEO of Meetup, and how he has really been deliberate in changing the way meetings are run to give not just women but introverts, is how he talks about it, to give people who don't naturally have loud voices, or naturally feel like the types who jump in and interject or talk over people, to give everybody a chance, an equal chance to have their ideas be heard. But that's something that a lot of women do encounter, is that that dynamic in meetings or in conversations where unless you talk a lot louder than you're not necessarily comfortable with at your natural voice volume, or unless you get comfortable interrupting and talking over people, which is not a natural tendency for a lot of women. You're at a disadvantage in terms of getting your ideas to be heard.
Well, you already shared like your transition from mentoring younger women and professionals and saying, "Hey, here's how you can adapt and mold yourself to fit into this environment," and to kind of switching the rules and let's change the culture overall.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think some bosses struggle in mentoring and helping women reach their full potential in the corporate world?
There's a couple of different things I've noticed. One is, I think it's important to say that most managers, most bosses really genuinely want to do better. They want to do more to support women, men absolutely included. And a lot of the men that I interviewed and talked with about this book, I think they don't want to seem inauthentic. They're sensitive to, like, I don't want to be the guy who comes in like, well, I'm gonna take care of this, I'm gonna get you what you need. There's this nervousness that I think emerges over time, where you want to be supportive, but you want to make sure you do it in the right way, and you don't come off as being like, presumptive, or thinking that, oh, you're the answer to her problem. So I think there's this hesitation from a lot of managers, especially men, where they don't want to come off as obnoxious, or as thinking that they're the answer. So that holds bosses back for sure. I think another thing that holds, maybe all humans back is giving direct, honest feedback, right? Like that's a whole topic. It's really hard. I think everybody struggles with it, no matter what their level, with, really giving that honest feedback, especially when it's critical. And I think that dynamic takes on an outsized discomfort when gender is brought in as well. And I think that people can have these perceptions of women that, might sound dated, but they still exist out there. If, can she handle it? I don't want to be mean. I feel like I need to be polite. So, sometimes that can be a downfall for managers of women, that they're, a little too careful or a little too chivalrous is maybe the way to say it. Instead of just being honest, when I think we all know, even though we know it could be hard to do, that, honesty is almost always the best thing to do as a manager.
So with feedback, if you don't mind me explore a little bit, is there a different way that you feel in your experience that women prefer to receive feedback than men, or is it universal that we just want honest, direct feedback, like you're saying?
Yeah, I think that it's universal. I think most women, when you ask them, say they'd rather just be spoken to like the men are. And they're very conscious and aware of when that's not happening. I mean, I've definitely felt that throughout my own career too, that like, oh, he's being a little nicer to me than he was to the guys. Like he jokes around with them, or he teases them, he gives them a harder time. And you notice that when you see the guys getting that, and then to you give a presentation, and then it's just like, thank you, Kate. It's too polite. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that most women just want to be treated the same.
I could see how that can create an exclusivity, us versus them, and an outsider kind of perspective. If there's one, behavior that you could banish and wave a magic wand that would be from the workplace, what would it be for men or women? I think we can look at it that way too.
Uh, One behavior. That's such a good question. I'm gonna go back to the basic one. So the first chapter of my book is all about names, getting names right. And as we were talking about that difference in the banter that sometimes you see among men, and women feel left out. One of the biggest things is that men much more often get addressed by their last name. And that can be, that can just be a nickname, like, hey, Walker. That doesn't happen with women. And I think whether it's banishing the using of the last names, or, making it universal, I think that if everybody equally used the last name nickname across men and women, it would make a huge, huge, huge difference. Because sometimes it's about just that equalizing the comfort and the friendliness, but it also can be about conveying respect. When you refer to, there's really interesting studies where you realize that male professors get referred to by their last name, more than 50% as often as female professors, and scientists, it's even more so. Politicians, the same. So the last name thing, I think, is a big one, that if everybody just were, more aware and didn't overuse it with one gender versus the other, I think it would make a big difference. And that's the kind of thing, the kind of change that I love, because it's very doable, right? Like it doesn't require people to, intrinsically change their personalities. It's just something to remember.
That's really fascinating. So that simple thing, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but of course, none of these things are intentional. These are often unconscious biases that we have. But calling a male colleague versus a female colleague by last name versus first name could also be a power thing too, as well as an
Mm-hmm.
affinity, like inner circle
Mm-hmm.
versus outer circle and closeness. And so by becoming aware of that simple thing, you can dramatically create more inclusivity versus exclusivity, sounds like, in the
Yeah.
organization. Yeah.
Yeah. When you said that, it just made me think, I wonder if sometimes the hesitation to do it with women is, I know people get tripped up about, wait, is she Miss or Mrs. or Ms.? And so I've seen that too. I'm realizing where it might be, Mr. Ryan, but, for me, it's like, wait, I don't know if I'm supposed to call her Ms. Walker or Mrs. Walker. So I'm just going to call her Kate. And I think that, yeah, there's so much you could, I mean, that it's the longest chapter in the book, I think, is my chapter about names. And at one point I was like, I think I could write a whole book about this. It's really incredible when you dig in all of those little kind of microaggressions that occur around names.
Totally, you're nailing it right there. Microaggressions. That it's subtle, but it's felt. It's an
Mm-hmm.
experience there. And
Yep.
names are identity. Like this is like the core of who we
Yes.
are.
Yeah.
Such
Mm-hmm.
yes, please write that book. We'll have you back. Yeah,
I mean, you must get, do people call you Ryan? Like
they
they,
do.
you have the first name, last name
They do.
phenomenon.
First name, all yeah, first names. Yep.
And it's grating, right? Like when you're like, my name is not Ryan, it's John. Like, I think that, it's like, pay attention. I think there's a lot to it.
What does an organization look like with good bosses? Like if you had organization with all good bosses, like what does that actually look like?
If you had an organization full of good bosses, I think that you would get, first of all, so much more work done because you wouldn't have to spend so much time navigating these things, thinking about these things, thinking about how you say what you say. I think that you would just, be incredibly productive for one. I also think you'd have really happy employees because everyone would be themselves. I think that when I think of my most fun work experiences over my career, it's when I really had authentic friendships. And when people know you, they really know you and they respect you for who you are. You have more fun together, you trust each other more. And it's really those are the places where, on a Friday evening, you're maybe all gonna hang out and go get a drink together instead of rushing to finish your last meeting and get back to your outside lives. I think there is people have different views about this, the sort of blending of social and work. Like I personally am a big believer that they have to be blended. I mean, you have to be the whole person that you are in the workplace. And I think if you had a company full of good bosses, that would come through. Everybody would really genuinely know each other and like each other.
And that takes some work. It does take some
Yes.
intention.
Yeah.
Speaking of work, what are some first steps you'd recommend to leaders in general who are wanting to become better bosses and to specifically support women in their organization?
So I think that the best place to start is by being authentic yourself, like really, opening up more, really talking about yourself, your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, just your life, who you are inside and outside of work. I think that it starts there. I think if you're more open, and again, always remembering as a leader, like you have more power, you set the tone to some degree. So I always recommend to start there, to start by, being more open about yourself. And then you'll find people then will come forward more and they'll approach you and they'll feel like they can, talk to you about whatever's on their minds if you take the first step.
Fantastic. This might be a different direction, but can you share with us a little bit, like, what's it really like for moms when they're returning back to work after having children? I don't know if I've ever heard that explored before or talked about it.
Yeah.
I would love to see if you might share some insights on that.
Yeah, coming back to work after after having any baby, but especially after your first, it's very surreal. I mean, you like the first for me, but for a lot of women that I've spoken to, those first 3 months of being a mom and having this baby, you are like really immersed in caring for that newborn, and you kind of lose a bit of yourself and your identity, and especially your professional identity if you're on leave that whole time. And so the day you come back, the first weeks that you're back, you're reorienting to who you were. You're reconciling who you were with who you are, and and there's a lot going on in your head about that, and there's a lot of conflict. You feel very pulled back to this baby who's at home and who needs you, and you want to be there and care for them, but you also feel this really kind of excitement, this rush in getting to be an independent person again for the first time in a few months, and getting to, add value in society in different ways. I mean, there's, it's, I've joked about this with a lot of women. I mean, you literally, you're excited in that first week back in the office that like you can go to the bathroom whenever you want to, like you're not on somebody else's schedule. So you're feeling this pull back and forth. And I think that what happens to a lot of women is the pull feels stronger from home than from work. And I write about this in the book, that there are really critical ways that a boss can, help or harm in that first day back, those first weeks back. If you leave a woman on her return from leave to her own devices, to kind of carve out a space for herself, to figure out what work is needed, what have other people been covering, what does she need to take back? If you leave her to her own devices to kind of make herself useful again, she's not going to feel as strong of a pull from the office as she is from the home. Whereas if you really immerse her right back into it, and you're like, oh, so glad you're back, we've been waiting for you, we really need you to pick up these things, if you sort of help her jump right back in, then it'll equalize, and it'll help her find her balance, because it's always a balance. I mean, I'm my older daughter is now 12, so I've been figuring out working motherhood for over a decade now, and it is still it's a little bit of a seesaw, and there are many moments where you have to find your balance, but you definitely need to and want to feel the pull in both directions.
So bringing them in, embracing them, getting them back to work, and showing appreciation and validation, like, wow, we're so great to have you back, and helping them feel included, I imagine, is part of that too. And
Yes.
jumping right in, head in, because their head is going to be pulled emotionally, psychologically, all those things, biologically as well, back to their child.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say they need to feel needed. They need to feel needed and necessary in the workplace. That's something that I remember in my first week back feeling almost the opposite. Like you feel this panic, like, oh, they figured out how to get by without me for 12 weeks. So, now maybe I'm not needed here anymore. And, I think that can be the beginning of the decisions that some women end up making to leave the workforce after that first baby. It's not typically that, a woman goes on leave and doesn't come back. The statistics show that the departures from the workforce happen later, sometime in that first year of coming back to the workplace. And I think it's about this question of, do you feel needed? Do you feel important at work? If you don't, well, you certainly feel needed and important somewhere else.
Love that. Going back to identity, feeling needed, feeling wanted, all those types of things. I love that. Thank you for sharing that insight. What if, when women come back to work and they want to feel needed, of course, they want to be part of the team and feel valued in that sense, if they're not getting the support, if they're not getting that, and it could not just be just about coming back from the workforce, but just in general, if they're not getting the support they need, how do you recommend they approach leadership and managers to try to get the support they're actually looking for in their job?
I think that one thing that I always recommend is to be very clear that you want more work, that that you're ready and able to take on more. I just had a conversation with a woman who works for me now, who's pregnant, and she said to me, totally proactively, well, I want you to know that I'm definitely coming back. And and I said, I want you to know that I had no doubt that you were. I assumed that you were, but I think it's great when you say that. Don't leave anybody wondering or guessing. Be very clear. I want to be here. And if you come back and you're flailing a little bit and you're not finding your place again in the organization, I think asking for more work is, from the woman's perspective, the best way to do it, right? Like that's, you're not, criticizing others or saying, or it's a much more targeted, give me a good project, give me something to work on, I need more. That's very actionable. It's a very actionable request. And I think that that's then also at the heart of what, what your managers, what your bosses should be doing. It's a little counterintuitive for some people. I think that where things can go wrong is managers feel like they're supposed to be sensitive, and they're supposed to recognize that, you've been out, you're a new mom, maybe maybe you need to ease into things, maybe you need some time. And I always say, like, maybe, but let her tell you that if it's too much and that's what she needs. Otherwise, I think it's generally always better to assume that she wants to do it.
So is that a conversation that a manager needs to have then? Would you recommend, say, hey, listen, tell me what you need. Are you ready to jump in? Do you want to ease in? Or what's the approach that's best for you right now? Is that a respectful way to go?
I think that's great to have that direct conversation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd probably want to lean it towards, like, I'm so ready for you to come back. I've got 10 things waiting for you. How are you feeling? Do you want all of them at once? Or, do you want to phase it in? I'm fine either way, but, always let them know that, there's a lot for them to do here. But I like the idea of having that direct conversation of, asking how much of it do you want? What do you need from me?
Well, I love that distinction you just made, because I was looking at it from an ambivalent either way, but you're saying no, bring that pressure in, because they have the pressure of the family life.
Yes.
Bring that
Yeah.
pressure in, and you can still be okay either way, but bring that pressure in to let them know that they're needed, validated, and a huge part of the team.
Definitely, definitely. And also, know that it's in her head, maybe it always wasn't mine, that when someone says, do you need more time, or you don't have to go on that trip if you don't want to, you hear it as, oh, they don't think I'm as good as I used to be, or I'm not as good of a worker as that guy over there. So even though it's not intended to send that message, it's intended to be considerate. It can, have that effect of making her feel like, oh, I'm not perceived to be as much of a go-getter as I used to be.
The nuance of language, it is
Mm-hmm.
unbelievably awesome and ever changing. It's fantastic. Obviously here at Key Conversations, we think, like we've been talking about, having these types of conversations is really critical. It's key. What are some key conversations that you've had in your life, either personally or professionally, that have significantly impacted you and where you are today?
Oh, I love that question. So a couple of years ago, I had this conversation that I think, it changed me a lot. And it was, I was still relatively new to running Presence Learning, and a woman who still works at the company, came to me, and I'd only met her once briefly. I didn't know her very well, and she asked for time to talk with me, and she said that she had been reading some of my writing, where I had talked about, my own battles with speaking up and being heard and asserting myself more, and feeling like I was a part of conversations. And so she said, I read that and I really connected with it, and I thought you'd want to know that I connected with it because that's how I'm made to feel right here at Presence Learning. And so it was, this moment for me where I recognized a couple of things. Number one, again, back to that importance of being vulnerable. Like, if I hadn't been open and shared about my struggles, I don't think she ever would have felt comfortable coming to me and telling me how she was feeling at this company that I was running. And so, you always as a leader, like, you need to know what's really going on. And for that, you've got to be trusted, and you've got to be, accessible for people to really tell you the truth. And so it was, recognition of, like, okay, it's really important to be very honest myself, so that people do feel like they can trust me, they can come to me. So that was one thing. But the bigger thing was, I just realized, you can, as a leader, you can say the right things about how you want your company to be and how you want people to act, but that doesn't mean it's happening everywhere. You have to, and to make sure that it is, you've got to be listening, asking, getting involved and interacting, and you've got to jump in. And in that case, it led to me getting more involved in areas that I wouldn't have otherwise known needed to change, in terms of the culture and, the way that we were having conversations and interacting and the way that we were giving opportunities for career development. So it's always, it made a huge difference in how I, managed the company that I'm in and that I'm still leading. But it also just has really stuck with me that, it's not enough to give speeches and say, what kind of leaders you want people to be. You've got to actually get in there and make sure that people are connecting that to the day-to-day actions that they're taking.
I love that. Thank you for circling all the way back to the importance of authenticity
Yeah.
and having congruence. It's wonderful. Kate, thanks so much for being here. It's been an incredible pleasure. What's the best way for our listeners and viewers to get in touch with you? And of course, to buy The Good Boss?
Yeah. So my website is kateeberlewalker.com. So you can get in touch with me that way. You can get lots of information about the book. And of course, the book itself is on sale in, your favorite booksellers everywhere. So I'd love for everyone to pick up a copy and then reach out to me through the website and tell me what you think about it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for watching and listening. Until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.